6 agents decided to sit at one table to find out who the traitor is. If anyone tries to lie, they'll be killed on the spot. Let's get started with our story. The story starts with George, who was a top agent, needed to secretly meet his boss one night. He went through a loud bar and a busy dance floor to find him. They went outside to talk privately. His boss told George that he was right. Someone in their team was a traitor. George was given a piece of paper with 5 names of people they thought could be the traitor. His own wife, Catherine, was on that list. The boss said it was because Catherine was also a top agent with important security access, and she had a reason and the ability to be the traitor. The boss said he had to report the truth. They had recently lost a very important device called Severus from the UK's cybersecurity center. If Severus was used as planned, many innocent people would die. But George asked his boss for 1 week. He promised he would find the traitor. He asked his boss not to report the list for now, and his boss agreed after thinking for a moment. They didn't know that someone else had seen their secret meeting. A few days later, George cooked a big meal for a party. Then he went upstairs to find Catherine, his wife. George had invited the 5 people on the list to dinner so he could try to find the traitor. So, with George and Catherine, there were 6 people for dinner. Catherine knew that there was a traitor in their organization too. She thought George would use a lie detector, but he had a different, quieter plan. George told Catherine not to eat the Indian chickpea curry because he had put a truth drug in it. When Catherine heard this, she stopped for a moment and then nodded, showing she understood. Someone at that dinner was lying. The 4 guests they invited all gathered together. One of them, a Dr. Zoe, wondered why they were meeting so suddenly, why only the 4 of them were invited, and why they only had 1 day's notice. But another guest, James, thought it was normal since they all worked together. There were 2 married couples there, which he thought was something regular people wouldn't understand. Soon, the 4 guests arrived at George's house. After they started eating, Catherine began talking about a time in 2012 when she helped with a cyber war in Syria. She said she wrote code to get into the enemy's main computer, which stopped their whole system. Another guest, Clarissa, was really surprised. She had seen that amazing code before and didn't know Catherine had written it. All 4 guests ate the curry with the truth drug, and they started saying things more openly. A round-faced man named Freddy suddenly said that George had spied on his father. He said his father was a womanizer who cheated a lot. He was a smart intelligence expert who was very careful, so his wife couldn't find any proof. But Freddy, his son who was also an agent, took action. George had filmed his father cheating and showed the video at a family dinner. This ruined his father's job and his marriage. Freddy said no one would hire a spy who could be beaten by his own son. George, knowing the drug was about to work more, suggested they play a game. Everyone sat around the table. Each person had to give a New Year's resolution to the person on their right, like trying to quit smoking. When it was the Dr. Zoe's turn, she gave a resolution to James, who was very eager to get promoted. Her resolution was for James to stop always trying to get the top job. James just smiled and didn't say anything. But right after that, the biggest fight of the night happened between Clarissa and Freddy, who were married. Freddy was embarrassed and angry that his secrets were out. He started yelling at Clarissa, saying he didn't have an affair and that she was lying about a good man who loved her. He then brought up problems in Clarissa's family to hurt her. But Freddy was surprised when George exposed him, just like George had exposed his father. George said the name of the hotel Freddy went to with his mistress. George even knew Freddy used work meeting times to secretly see her. Clarissa was so upset that she grabbed a dinner knife and stabbed Freddy in the hand. The dinner party ended in a crazy way. After everyone left, Catherine guessed that George had used too much of the truth drug. George didn't say she was wrong. While he was cleaning up, he found a torn movie ticket in the trash. The time on the ticket showed that Catherine should have been on a trip overseas then. Could his wife really be the traitor? George felt suspicious but didn't show it yet. Meanwhile, George's boss didn't go home much. But one night, after he finished his glass of wine, his body started shaking uncontrollably and he died. The next morning, George woke up earlier than usual and made breakfast. He acted like nothing was wrong and asked Catherine if she wanted to see a movie. Catherine said that on Wednesday, she had a one-day business trip overseas. When George mentioned the name of the movie on the ticket he found, she said she had never heard of it. However, while Catherine wasn't looking, George secretly slipped his work ID card into her purse. After that, George went to work on time. He told the receptionist he had forgotten his card and used his personal ID to get a temporary pass. As soon as George entered the office area, Freddy came over and told him that their boss had died suddenly the night before from heart disease. Freddy thought it was strange because their boss was so young. He wondered if there was something suspicious going on and asked George if he knew what the boss had been working on recently. Of course, George wouldn't tell someone he suspected of being the traitor. Right after that, George went to Catherine's office floor because he wanted to get his work ID card back. Catherine was in a meeting, so she gave her work ID card to George. George then went straight to his wife's office without stopping. George first put on rubber gloves so he wouldn't leave any fingerprints. Then, he immediately turned on Catherine's computer and looked at her recent schedule. He saw that she was scheduled for a business trip to Zurich that Wednesday, and there were even specific map coordinates marked. George quickly wrote down these coordinates. After Catherine's meeting, she went to the office of the Dr. Zoe, who was in charge of the Signals Warfare Department. They sat down and talked in detail. The Dr. Zoe needed to understand if the agents had any mental health issues. Catherine told her that she still wasn't sleeping well and still needed to take a little bit of lorazepam every night to help her sleep. Hearing this, the Dr. Zoe frowned slightly. The amount Catherine mentioned was just below the level that needed to be reported, so she suspected Catherine was hiding how much she was really taking. Catherine immediately said this wasn't true and that she wouldn't lie about something like that. The Dr. Zoe had no choice but to end the questioning and let Catherine go back to work. At the same time, after work, George went to his usual spot for wild fishing. Fishing was his way to relax and think. When he was fishing and thinking about problems, he often got new ideas. George took a small boat to the middle of the lake. As he was fishing and thinking about the strange things that had happened in the last few days, his fishing line suddenly broke. George looked towards the shore and saw that James had found him again. He quickly went back to the shore. James told him that something important had happened. He explained that their finance team always worked with the tax authorities, regularly checking banks and tax havens to make sure none of their fake identities were being used to open secret accounts overseas. There had never been any problems before, but this time they had surprisingly found that someone had used the name Margaret to open an overseas account. This name, Margaret, was an old fake name used by the FBI 20 years ago and was supposed to be blocked in their system. But just yesterday, a huge amount of money, 7 million British pounds, was moved out of that account. So, someone had stolen this secret identity to receive all that money. And where did the money go? To Zurich. George's heart sank. This new information strongly suggested Catherine was involved. That evening, George and Catherine went to see a movie. While they were watching, George quietly watched his wife. It seemed like she really had never seen the movie before. Early the next morning, George took Catherine to the airport for her business trip. Because it was a secret mission, Catherine didn't tell George why she was going to Zurich. But George needed to clear his wife's name and find out the truth. So that night, he went to Clarissa's house to ask for a favor. Even though Freddy and Clarissa had a big fight at the dinner party, they were still together. You could say they were a good match for drama. Clarissa was in charge of watching the security camera footage at headquarters. George needed her to briefly change the camera's view the next morning so it wouldn't be locked and recording. Clarissa quickly said she couldn't do that. George patiently explained that during the short time the camera view was being changed, the satellite could be used for other things without anyone noticing. George had done this successfully on a mission before. The next day, George arrived early at the place Clarissa had told him about. He gave Clarissa the map coordinates he had found on Catherine's computer. They only had 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Time was running out. Clarissa quickly used the satellite to start searching and finally found a bench in a square in Zurich. Then Catherine appeared in their view. Clarissa looked smug because she thought George was also being cheated on. Just then, a man sat down next to Catherine. George told Clarissa to zoom in closer and then use facial recognition. They only had 1 minute left, so they needed to hurry. The next second, Clarissa found the man's identity. His name was Kulikov and he was Russian. Then Clarissa used AI to read their lips. They heard Catherine seemed to be buying something from Kulikov. With only a few seconds left, Clarissa tried to stop the operation but realized she couldn't exit the system at all. In her panic, she missed their window of opportunity. Even after she unplugged the AI, she finally got out of the system, but the image was still on the big screen. George told Clarissa not to panic and to delete all the operation logs to make sure there was no evidence left. At the same time, Freddy, after seeing something on his computer, quickly called George. When George saw it, he was also very shocked. Soon after, their boss held a secret meeting. It turned out that the Federation had been watching a Russian general named Vadim nonstop. He was working with a group of exiled military leaders to try and overthrow the Russian government, which was having problems because of the war. There were rumors that Vadim had Severus. But strangely, early that morning, the satellite that was watching him suddenly changed its view for 2 minutes. By the time it went back to normal, Vadim had disappeared. How did the enemy know exactly when the satellite would switch unless someone inside their headquarters told them? When George heard this, his heart raced. He realized that what he and Clarissa had done had unintentionally helped a dangerous person get away. Then, their leader mentioned Kulikov's name again. Turned out Kulikov worked for Vadim. After everyone else left, the leader told George, Freddy, and James that Vadim likely had Severus, which was why they were watching him. If Vadim got Severus back to Moscow, it would be a disaster. Severus was a special computer virus they had developed with the U.S. National Security Agency. It had to be physically put into a nuclear reactor to get past its security. But once inside, it could shut down the reactor and cause it to melt down, a very dangerous cyber weapon. They had realized that Severus couldn't leave their building because if other countries got it, they could also cause nuclear disasters, which would be a huge threat to the U.S. But now, someone had helped Vadim escape with the virus. The leader ordered the three of them to find the insider quickly, using any means they had. After the meeting, George was still shocked. He didn't expect Clarissa to immediately tell Freddy everything George had asked her to do. Meanwhile, Catherine got on her plane to come home. But when she arrived, Freddy was already waiting for her. He told her what had happened that day and that if Vadim got back to Moscow, George would be blamed and could go to prison for 35 years. Freddy then asked Catherine if she knew why George had been watching her. But Catherine didn't know. That evening, Catherine was in bed. George suddenly turned over, realizing he felt like he had been set up. Catherine agreed. It was clear that someone was trying to harm them both. Someone was plotting against George, thinking he would try to protect his wife, which was exactly what was happening. Because of this, George had fallen into a trap and unintentionally let Vadim escape. If they investigated further, George would surely be considered the traitor. And Catherine's meetings with Kulikov would make it hard for her to avoid suspicion. But George and Catherine weren't going to just wait for bad things to happen. The next day, George went back to his fishing spot. But this time, he specifically asked James to come. They went out on the boat together. George told James he was planning to do a series of lie detector tests. James agreed, but asked George who he thought the insider was. George was quiet for a moment, and then said he didn't know for sure yet. James then changed the subject and talked about the bank incident. He said that according to his investigation, Margaret was the name Catherine used on her passport in 2008. The system had some errors, and this passport had been used many times, even for 10 years, with at least 40 to 50 entry and exit records. Meanwhile, Catherine had a plan to find the real traitor. First, she asked Clarissa to get Kulikov's phone's location history. Then, she secretly arranged to meet a good friend who worked at the CIA. She knew that anyone within the FBI could be the traitor. It turned out that after her meeting with Kulikov, she had secretly put a tracking device on him. This time, she used her connections to get the CIA to send a drone to kill Kulikov and Vadim, saying they were a threat to the country. This way, no one could accuse her of working with the Russians, and it would also stop Severus from being transported. It was like solving two problems at once. Right after that, Catherine met with her boss, Arthur, at a sushi restaurant. She knew that Arthur was definitely involved in this. Otherwise, someone of their rank wouldn't be able to harm her and George. Catherine told Arthur that he had to stop his plan immediately. Arthur laughed and said it was too late, telling her to check the CIA drone status. Catherine doing this made sense because if a nuclear meltdown happened, many innocent people would die. No matter how angry Arthur was, it didn't matter. At the same time, a drone was flying very fast towards Kulikov and Vadim and then dropped a bomb, killing them both instantly. Meanwhile, George started the lie detector test. He asked basic questions and then more detailed ones, changing them often and sometimes asking suddenly, "Was it you who stole Severus?" The computer showed everyone's emotional reactions. But George quickly noticed something strange. Everyone else had strong emotional changes, but Clarissa's readings stayed very steady. Clarissa's calmness made George suspicious. He immediately made the questions harder. After questioning her, he learned that Clarissa had read books on how to trick lie detectors by controlling her body's reactions. After finishing the tests, George invited everyone to his house for dinner again. If Arthur was the one behind everything, then there must be someone helping him among them. This dinner was the chance to catch that person. Soon everyone had arrived. Catherine announced the rules. Catherine announced that everyone would take turns answering George's questions, and anyone who answered incorrectly would be punished. She then pulled out a handgun from her bag, stating clearly, "Tonight, someone will not leave this house alive." The Dr. Zoe sharply noticed that the rug under the table had been replaced, realizing their hosts were serious. The mood in the room instantly turned icy. To save themselves, the guests had no choice but to participate. George started with the Dr. Zoe, asking, "When did you start having an affair with Freddy?" It turned out that Freddy's secret lover was the Dr. Zoe. Clarissa immediately felt sick to her stomach. The Dr. Zoe honestly admitted it had been about 7 or 8 weeks. Next, both Freddy and Clarissa answered George's questions correctly. Finally, it was James' turn. George asked him, "That night, did you intentionally throw the movie ticket in the trash so that I would suspect Catherine?" James denied it. George continued to reveal James' scheme. He explained that Arthur had initially suggested stealing Severus to James because it would destabilize Moscow, frame Catherine, and remove George from the picture, a perfect plan. Later, James stole Severus and tricked Catherine into going to Zurich, making her believe she was retrieving the virus. Then, he threw the movie ticket away to make George suspicious of Catherine's schedule. James had also guessed that George would ask Clarissa to redirect the satellite to watch Catherine, giving James the opportunity to let Vadim escape during the satellite's temporary blind spot. The final part of his plan was to blame George for being the traitor. This clever plan, however, had one fatal flaw. James had personally opened the overseas account in Myanmar. George then showed a stack of photos of James at the Myanmar bank. Seeing the evidence, James stopped denying everything. He grabbed the gun and admitted he had done it all. He argued that he was right, as this was a great chance to weaken Russia. He even used poison to kill their superior for this purpose. He claimed that, without a confession, it was all just guesswork. But George unilaterally redirecting the spy satellite was a fact, enough to send him to prison for life. James was shocked to realize that George, the experienced agent, had secretly planted a recording device, and the gun James was holding was a fake. The situation instantly changed. Afterward, George wrapped James' body in the rug and dumped it in his wild fishing spot. Arthur, who was also guilty, didn't dare say anything and had to treat James' disappearance as an accident. George and Catherine's life went back to normal. Thank you for watching it. The story ends here.